So welcome again, everybody here for this special bonus meeting of this Stress Control Summit. And we are together with Lucia Tiffany. You know, Lucia, she is a health educator and she worked quite a few years already, you know, I think. Has collected some experiences these years, you know. And, you know, I think I will turn it over to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Martin. Appreciate that introduction. And I'm just so glad to be here with each one of you. I would love to hear from you. Drop it in your chat. Why is managing stress important for you? It really helps me to know where I'm going to go with this presentation if I know kind of where you're coming from. So like, why is it important for you to be an excellent stress manager in your own life? Just go ahead and drop that in the chat because we have different reasons for it. Sometimes maybe it's a job we have that's stressful and we know that we're not going to be able to stay in this job if we can't manage what's going on better. Or maybe it's a relationship that we're in and it's really stressful and the relationship might be at risk if we aren't able to manage our stress. So I am really curious to know what brings each one of you here to this bonus session. We had a wonderful summit with Martin, with many different presenters talking about different aspects of stress management. But this one, I want to be something that is really helpful to you and hopefully really practical. So health problems can cause stress. That's a really big stressor for a lot of people. And stress makes my symptoms much worse. So it's a vicious cycle. That's a really great motivation for wanting to manage stress better. And Freeman says, as a stress management coach, I'm always looking to provide more value to my clients. So I love that. So we get to learn from each other. And for me, that's always exciting. And I love collaborating. And so I'm going to be wanting you to be participating in this. This is not like a lecture where I just get to talk and you just get to listen, because I don't think you'll take away as much if I do that. So I want this to be interactive. So the chat is a great way for us to do that without disrupting the recording. So I love that. And I have our first kid on the way sometime in the next week. So getting ready for that. I love that, Freeman, because your level of stress is just going to go to a whole nother level as you become a parent. And I can say that from experience. But we're going to be talking today about how to be excellent stress managers. So I'm going to just go ahead and dive right in, sharing my screen, because I think it's going to help us to explain this a little bit better. And as soon as you can give me permission for that, Martin, I will go ahead and get shared. Okay. I'm going to be sharing some slides that come from a larger program called Stress Beyond Coping. I'm currently teaching it in the community, but it's really brings some thoughts together nicely in ways that I want to share with you. So I'm going to be using that. And I want to start by talking about the fact that there are different kinds of stress. And they're stressors that are level 1, level 2, and level 3. And we can deal with these each differently. But there's one thing I want you to notice from this slide. You will notice, for example, that level 1 is a physical and real stressor. Okay, that's the one where you're walking down the road and you see a mountain lion in front of you. Okay, and about maybe 5 to 10% of our stress in general would fall into that category. So it's not a very big part of our stress that we're usually dealing with. Level 2 is an emotional or psychological stressor that is also real. Maybe somebody is yelling at us. Maybe I'm in a fight with someone verbally. I'm not physically threatened, but it's verbally or emotionally challenging. That is also real, like it's actually happening. It's actually in my present. And about 10 to 20% of our stress may fall into that category. But what's very interesting is that level 3 stress, which is emotional and psychological, it is not physical, and it can be real or perceived, and often perceived, as we're going to see, which means that level 3 stress actually is stress that we have control over our response to in a very real way. And it is also stress that we more or less create for ourselves. And that is 80 to 90% of our stress. So we're going to be focusing on dealing with level 3 stress in this session, because that's where most of your stress is coming from. And it's also where you have the most control over stress in your life. Okay, so just as a little review of some of the brain physiology, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but we have centers in our brain like the thalamus that receive data from all of our senses. What we hear, what we see, what we feel, all comes into this processing center. And then the thalamus sends out messages, sends messages to the limbic system, which is our emotional response, and gives sensory information, meaning and emotion, which means like if I hear a buzzing bumblebee, the limbic system tells me that's a bumblebee, I've been bit before, and I don't like this. But it also sends messages to our prefrontal cortex. That is the part of your brain right behind your forehead where we do a lot of cognitive problem solving. So information goes to several different places. But the prefrontal cortex is special because it acts as the brain's CEO. It actually has veto power over our responses in many other parts of our brain. And the prefrontal cortex is where our viewpoint of what's going on lives. So it's where our beliefs, our attitudes, and our interpretations of the data that comes into our body lives. So the prefrontal cortex with beliefs, attitudes, interpretation can have two different effects on our stress response. It can either make a current stress response worse, or it can tamp down a stress response that has begun. So the prefrontal cortex has that power. So what happens there with our beliefs, attitudes, and interpretations are very important. We're going to be looking at how to use this information for our benefit. So for example, you see a honeybee and you're allergic to bees, okay, which happens to be like something I deal with. When you see that bee very close to you, the data comes in, the hypothalamus says, oh, danger, beware. And the limbic system says, oh, last time this happened, it was not good. So all of a sudden I'm going to be feeling fear. And you'll notice that my stress response, that's the physiological changes in my body, like sweaty hands or a little bit increased heart rate, more blood to my muscles. All of that response gets started right there. But the other processing center hasn't weighed in yet, which is your prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex might weigh in and say, I'm allergic to bees. I will die if I get stung. And what do you think is going to happen to the stress response? Give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Is it going to go up or is it going to go down? My stress response is going to go up because my prefrontal cortex is augmenting that response. But on the other hand, if my prefrontal cortex messages says, bees will not sting if unprovoked, and I can use my EpiPen if I get stung, that will tamp down the stress response that my body is experiencing. So the prefrontal cortex has this powerful veto power over how we actually respond to stress by either revving it up or throttling it down. So when we're looking at a level 3 stress response, which is the majority of the stress that we feel, we have a stressor and we get a stress response to it. It has physiological, emotional, and behavioral components. And this can be a real or a perceived threat, but it's based on the data that the thalamus is sending to the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. But it also includes imagined threats where there's no actual sensory data coming in. Maybe we're replaying in our brain something really terrible that happened to us in the past, a trauma, a traumatic experience, or maybe we're worrying about something in the future. So it's not actually in our present time space, something that happened before or something we think might happen in the future. That is what we call phantom stress. So we get a whole full-blooded stress response to it in our body, but it's phantom stress because it doesn't actually exist in the present. So PTSD, for example, would be an example of one of those stressors from the past. Nothing is actually happening right now that is causing me to have this anxious feeling, but it is definitely a stressor. So as we look at the power of our viewpoint, that is our beliefs, attitudes, and interpretations, we can both create stress out of thin air, literally, we call that phantom stress, or we can disarm a potential stressor. And so I wanted to give you some tools today for disarming the stress. So some of those phantom stressors that we may deal with, and I want you to be thinking about things that you might specifically have experience with, is, for example, when we relive or replay past hurts. They can actually turn into chronic stress, the kind that damages our health. It could be a painful divorce. It could be an unjust verdict that we got in court. Maybe it was unfair treatment on the job. Anything that is in the past and that was negative, as we replay it, we continue to experience a stress response, but it's actually what I call phantom stress because our brain created it. And we created it by our thoughts. Now, we also may have phantom stress around the future. What if I can't pay my bills this month? Or what if I can't fix my relationship with fill in the blanks, most important relationship in your life? What if I lose my job? All of those are beliefs or attitudes about current or future events and can turn into chronic worries with all of the problems with that. Dr. Spolowski, in his book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, says this: it is the critical point of this book. If you're the zebra running for your life or a lion sprinting for your meal, your body's physiological response mechanisms are superbly adapted for dealing with such short-term physical emergencies. But when we sit around and worry about stressful things like mortgages, relationships, or promotions, we turn on the same physiological response, but they're potentially a disaster when we provoke them chronically. So you can see here the difference between a stress that is temporary or that becomes chronic. Whoops, went the wrong direction here. So if the prefrontal cortex chimes in with a positive viewpoint to the messages it's getting from the processing centers, it can say, no worries, we can handle this, and it can actually turn off the switch to our physiological response. So the next time you're experiencing stress, you want to ask yourself, is this level 1, level 2, or level 3? The majority of our stress is not based on a real threat to our well-being from the outside world, or even from a physiological illness, which would be a legitimate sort of stress, but it is a stress we've created out of thin air. So when we can really recognize phantom stress, we can stop creating it for ourselves. And so I'm going to give you some tools to look at that. Let me just skip a few slides here. Almost everything that happens to you requires a particular viewpoint, belief, or interpretation in order for it to evoke a response in you, whether that response is positive or negative. And no matter what your stress, your viewpoint, that is what your thoughts are around your attitude, your beliefs, or your interpretation of what just happened, will have the last word in how you manage the stress and whether it will become chronic distress, which breaks down your body and creates illness, or whether it becomes beneficial eustress, which does not damage you. So it's really, I want it to be really clear that it's not the event, but rather the way we perceive events that determine the level of stress and the kind of stress that we are dealing with. So it is really our attitude that determines whether we perceive an experience as pleasant or unpleasant. And adopting the right one can convert a negative stress into a positive one. Barbara Brown, in her book Between Health and Illness, wrote, stress arises out of the way we interpret our circumstances and interaction with people. So it's really interesting that the way a stressor works in our body determines on how our brain thinks about the situation. And it is our psychological reaction to the situation that is as important or even more important than the event that we often identify as the trigger for the stress. So the takeaway from this part of my presentation is that events don't inevitably lead to stress reactions. It's our interpretations of events that do. And I'm going to give you some examples. Barbara Brown also in her book wrote, stress is 90% how the mind looks at difficulties in life, and relieving stress, that's our goal here, right, is 100% the way the mind uses its resources to resist the effects of stress and learns how to deal with stress without distress. So beginners in the area of stress management will recognize activating events or stressors, and they'll also recognize the consequence, which is our response to the stress. It might be something physiological, might be emotional, or it might be behavioral, or all three. But we're going to up-level your understanding of stress. And we do that by looking at the big ABCs of stress management: activating event, beliefs, and consequences. That's ABC. Activating event, beliefs, that's your filter, and the consequence is how you end up feeling, right? That physiological, emotional, or behavioral consequence. So as we move into a more advanced understanding of stress management, you'll realize that stress is not your reaction to the stressor as much as it is a reaction to your interpretation of the stressor. So it is our beliefs that empower stressors in our life and enables them to produce the amount of stress you're experiencing. And to a very great degree, you can control the level of stress that you will experience. So there's a cycle here that I want you to understand, because we're going to be able to unpack this and make it a tool for you to de-arm the grenade of stress in your life. So our world contains a series of positive, neutral, and negative events. Our thoughts are how we interpret the events, and those are thoughts that we're always thinking in our brain. We call that an internal dialogue. Like you're always having this conversation with yourself. But it's your thoughts then that produce your mood. So your feelings are actually created by your thoughts and not by the actual events. All of your experiences are processed through your brain, and it is your brain that gives conscious meaning even before you experience an emotional response. So when you realize that there's these steps to how you feel, it doesn't go straight from some event or some trigger to a feeling. There is always a piece that goes through your thoughts, whether you're aware of it or not. So the part that happens in the world is your activating event, the stressor. Maybe it's the boss yelling at you, the car that cut in front of you on the freeway, or the child that's talking back to you, whatever it is, right? Beliefs are the thoughts that assign a meaning to your stressor, and the consequence, the C, is the stress level that you experience. In Matthew 6:22, it's interesting that there's even a verse in the Bible that talks about that. It says, your eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. If your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. And it kind of gives us a little bit of that principle behind what we're thinking. It's what we do with what's coming in through our senses that determines how we feel. Norman Anderson wrote the book Antibodies of the Mind, and he says our expectations, explanations, and beliefs about the world and about ourselves function in many respects like antibodies to the mind. So what did he mean? What he meant was that antibodies destroy cells and organisms that threaten the well-being of the body. So our expectations, explanations, and beliefs provide us with some defense against negative life experiences that maybe could harm us emotionally or psychologically. But the truth is that if we can change an interpretation of an event, we can effectively change the impact that the event has on us. And so we have two kinds of beliefs that we're dealing with as filters to the events that happen in our lives. We have what I like to call SIBs, which are stress-inducing beliefs, and they enable the stressor to induce distress. And SRBs, which are stress-reducing beliefs, then actually can disable the stressor reduce the distress, and create eustress in our life. And so we see that that middle B for beliefs, that filter determines how we experience the stressor or trigger in our life. And it has to do with our beliefs about that trigger. So for example, let's say that the only way you could go to visit your sister would be to get on a plane and travel to another state. So that was the only practical way to go. Now, your beliefs about the safety of flight is going to affect your experience of that trip. For example, if you have the stress-inducing belief that airplanes are unsafe for travel, your experience of that trip is going to be very different. For example, maybe you saw the Newsweek article that came out about the commuter plane that went down in a field in Ohio and killed all 67 passengers on board. And so that reinforced your belief that airplanes are unsafe for travel. In that case, you may be experiencing fear, anxiety, maybe nervousness about the trip. You might even lose sleep for some days or weeks before the trip. But maybe if you read to the end of the Newsweek article where it talked about the fact that statistically planes are safer than cars. In other words, you are 150 times more likely to die in a car accident on your way to the airport than you are to die on a plane ride, because that's also a fact. Then that belief that statistically planes are safer than cars is going to lead to a completely different experience around your trip. You're going to feel excitement, anticipation. You'll be calm during the trip. You might even relax and fall asleep, all because you have a different belief about the flight. So that's how beliefs impact it. So what about interpretations? What is an interpretation? Well, what it means is that you make the call on how you interpret events around you. To a great extent, if something is going to create distress in your life or eustress, depends on how you call it. For example, in a baseball game, the umpire gets to call the ball or the strike. And there's kind of a little funny story about a baseball game. And there was an umpire who was very slow at making calls. He liked to think about them. And so the captain, or I should say the coach of this one team, was starting to get frustrated with the referee. And their pitch came across the plate, and the umpire just kind of stood there and he didn't say anything. And the coach jumped out of the dugout and he says, "Would you please tell us, was that a strike or a ball?" The umpire looked at him and he says, "It ain't anything till I call it something." And it's like we're the umpire in our lives because we get to make the call on what something means. So when a potentially stressful event occurs in your life, remember that it ain't nothing till you call it something. So you get to determine what that interpretation is, and you're the one that's going to make the call every single time. So what can we do if we have a stressor and we realize that maybe we are interpreting it in a negative way? Did you know you can actually mentally shift and reinterpret a stressor in a more positive way? One of my friends was a chaplain, and he was traveling to Chicago, which was several hours from his home, to visit a sick parishioner. When he got there, he was feeling pretty tired, and he really wanted to take a nap before he saw this parishioner. So he pulled into the parking lot, but the only empty parking space was about 20 feet from a jackhammer operator. And you know what kind of noise a jackhammer operator will have. And so his first impulse was, "Oh no, I'm not going to be able to take a nap because I got this big noisy machine 20 feet from my car." But then he realized what he was doing. He realized how he was interpreting the presence of the jackhammer operator. He chose to shift the way he interpreted it. And he started thinking, he realizes, I'm here in Chicago, and Chicago's not the safest place. And I want to go to sleep here in my car, which is a pretty public place, not particularly protected, but I really don't have to worry about anybody bothering me with this jackhammer operator 20 feet from my car. Nobody's going to bother me if he knows there's a witness nearby. So this jackhammer operator is actually providing me a safe place to take my nap before I go to see my parishioner. And as he reinterpreted that, he was able to take a nap, get all rested, and go in and see his parishioner without the jackhammer bothering him one bit. So that's how interpretations affect whether we have the consequence of distress or eustress. But another part of this, attitudes, interpretations, and the third one is symbolic value that we ascribe to whatever the stressor was. So an example would be another friend who hated parking tickets. And he got a parking ticket once and he just hated having to go to court, having to pay the ticket. And he was like, I never want another parking ticket again. So he was very careful whenever he went into the city. He always made sure he had plenty of money in the meter, never wanted to run out and have a parking ticket. Well, he went into a conference in a city. It was a part of the city he wasn't really well acquainted with. One day he went in and parked his car a couple blocks away, went to the meetings. When he came out and walked down the street, lo and behold, his car had disappeared. And he was so upset because now he had to walk to the police station, which was a few blocks away in another direction. He had to file a missing car report. His car had been stolen, get the police report, call his wife to come and pick him up. And that was kind of, a ways away. And so while he was waiting for his ride after he'd done all of this paperwork, he was walking around the block some more, just kind of wandering around in the area. And all of a sudden, guess what he saw? Any ideas?
Oh, his car.
Ah, you're right, Martin. He spotted his car. Turns out he had not remembered correctly where he had parked his car. And guess what? When he got to his car, there was a ticket on the windshield because he had spent so much time with the police report and everything that he'd gone over time. But when he saw that parking ticket, he picked that ticket up and he practically kissed it. He was so glad that his car wasn't stolen. And so all of a sudden, this ticket had a completely different meaning to him because no longer was it about him being careless or not paying, but it was like it meant his car had not been stolen. So that had a really big impact on how he felt about the parking ticket, right? The other major beliefs that will affect our reaction to stressors are things like having low self-esteem, maybe we don't like someone, or maybe we have certain superstitions. All of those major beliefs will impact the way we react to stressors that come in our life. So the way we convert bad stress into good is by adopting a healthy viewpoint. And one of the tools that we can use to do that is to challenge our stress-inducing beliefs. So the way you do that is notice when you're starting to have one of those negative feelings. Maybe you're feeling afraid, or maybe you're feeling sad. Maybe you're feeling like nothing matters, like maybe you feel like giving up. Whatever that feeling is, you want to start analyzing your self-talk. That is the way you're thinking about it. Because as we talked about this, remember how everything that happens goes through your thoughts, and that creates the way you feel. So we can use this tool of working backwards from how we feel, consequences, to looking at what was the trigger. That was your stressor. It was the yelling, the car that cut you off, the whatever it was. And then go, what was I thinking about that? So what was my belief, my attitude, my interpretation around the stressor? And we might discover that some of our beliefs that are creating these negative emotions are things like this belief. This is a pretty common belief, actually, and that is that life must be fair to me at all times. If we believe this, even at a subconscious level, if something happens that's not fair, guess how we feel? We feel bad. But the belief itself needs to be looked at. Do I really believe that life must be fair to me at all times? How many of you think that is a valid belief? Is that actually true? Must life, that must, that's an absolute, and so is the word all. And actually, anytime you run into an absolute in the form of these kinds of beliefs, we got to really look at them closely, because many times they're not an accurate representation of reality. Because of course, life is not always fair. But there's other stress-inducing beliefs. Maybe I must succeed at everything I do, which doesn't allow for mistakes or failures. It is a need to be perfect. Some people call it perfectionism, or for some people it might show up as OCD, really obsessive about something. But if we realize that's what's going on, I'm thinking that I must succeed at everything I do, then I get to challenge that belief and say, is that really true? Is that a true reflection of reality? Here's another common one. Everyone must love me and accept me at all times. You'll notice that these stress-inducing beliefs, although they are common, are not accurate expressions of truth. And there's a verse in the Bible that says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And the reality is that when we tell ourselves the truth, we set ourselves free from the chains of most of our distress, most of that negative stress that so affects our health, our relationships, our wealth, all these different aspects of our life. So when we challenge our stress-inducing beliefs, we get to replace them with stress-reducing beliefs. And how we feel will change drastically. Good stress-reducing beliefs are reality-based. They're based on truth. I love this little poster. Life's not easy. Don't try and make it that way. It's not fair. It never was. It isn't now. It won't ever be. Do not fall into the entitlement trap of feeling you are a victim. You are not. Get over it and get on with it. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in this little poster, because anytime we feel this level of entitlement, we are going to come away feeling like a victim. The victim feeling comes from not being responsible and understanding that we actually have power over the things that are happening around us. We may not have power over the stressor itself, but we have the complete power of choice over how we respond to the stressor. And that response is mediated through our thoughts. So if we look at the stress-inducing belief of life must be fair to me at all times, which obviously doesn't check out with reality, we can replace it. We get to choose to replace it with a stress-reducing belief like the following. I would like to always be treated fairly, but everyone is treated unfairly at times. It is possible to be treated unfairly and still be happy. And do you sense how different you feel when you read the second statement versus the first statement? The emotional fallout is completely different. Another one is, everyone must love and accept me at all times. We could replace that with the stress-reducing belief of, I would like to always be loved, but that's unrealistic. It doesn't feel good not to be accepted, but it's not catastrophic. When someone rejects me, it doesn't devalue me. And I think this is a really important piece, because many times when we feel rejection, lack of acceptance, we feel like we're a failure, we're not enough, we're not worthy. All of those feelings come from that stress-inducing belief of everyone must love and accept me at all times. But the truth is that it's not catastrophic not to be loved or accepted. And when someone rejects me, it doesn't change my value. And as a Christian, I would say the reason this is so true is that my value does not come from other people's opinions of me. It comes from God's opinion of me. And that's actually the only one that matters. And because God thinks I am unique and infinitely valuable, it makes it so. And that means nobody can do or say anything that takes away from my value. Some of the people in this world that have made some of the greatest contributions have always had detractors. What about this stress-inducing belief? I must succeed at everything I do. Well, Here's a good stress reducing belief around that. I would like to always be successful, but no one is always successful. Failing at something doesn't devalue me again. And failure can sometimes be a stepping stone to even greater achievement. It's what I do with the failure that matters most. So I get to choose a response that's going to help me to learn from that experience and maybe make better choices about avoiding that kind of experience in the future. So I think that's kind of, there's one about drivers. And as we just said, good stress reducing beliefs are reality based. And so that's kind of the piece I really wanted to share with you today, but I want to give us time for questions and answers around how we think about things that happen to us and how that affects our emotions, our feelings, and the level of stress that we experience. So I'd love to hear if you have any questions or comments, please just drop them in the chat. And I did notice from my earlier question at the beginning that Micah said, I would like to take care of stress so I can find my true self. And do you see how as you replace stress-inducing beliefs that are not based on reality, you will be experiencing more eustress, you will be experiencing more health around your responses to stress in ways that will enable you to be the best version of yourself. Because stress does not do that for us. Stress works against our growth, our development, and even our ability to learn. So as we become expert stress managers and we start thinking about how we think, replacing stress-inducing beliefs with stress-reducing beliefs, we'll find that it really has a strong impact on how we feel. So, yeah, if you have a question, feel free. I'm happy for you to unmute, just raise your hand if you have a question, or you can drop it in the chat. Lorena says, very helpful. I can see how my health problems have an element of genuine threat at times, but my beliefs and interpretations create additional and unnecessary stress. Oh, Lorena, I think that is so amazing that you caught that. And I want you to really walk away with that and say, I'm going to start thinking about what are my beliefs, what are my interpretations, so I'm not creating that unnecessary stress, because we need to just get rid of phantom stress. Wouldn't you agree? I don't think any of us really need to take that along with us on our journey through life. If we just deal with the real present stresses that are actually physical and maybe threaten us, we're going to be in a much better position energy-wise, emotionally wise, and we will be in a better place to experience better health, better relationships, better finances. That all is affected as we deal more positively with stress. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, Lucia, while the people are thinking about some questions, you have some time to think. Let me take just a minute. I want to show you something what we have coming up.
Sure, that'd be great.
We're going to start, just next Sunday, we're going to start the next group of our stress management tools. That's a 12-week training program that we have. And, you need to think, what is stress really doing to you? How is it affecting your life? What's happening when you're stressed out, how do you suffer in your health, in your relationships, everything else? What's the consequences of that, And if you're stressed out, you need to look at what can you do to really manage that. And, I studied quite a bit on that, and in stress management tools, I tried to compile, some, an effective tool set of different things that you can do really to control your stress, and we have the different topics that we cover. We look first at the stress symptoms, what is stress doing to you, then finding the sources of stress. Many times we're looking techniques, how we're controlling the stress, instead of really removing the source. We need to find out, where is the stress coming from, what can we do to eliminate some of the stresses, you know? Financial stress is a big one nowadays, you know, the economy is struggling and we all feel the impact of that. So we need to look how to manage our finances in a better way. And then we can do in the lifestyle, you know, in the things that we do, the exercise, the sleep, the nutrition, everything like that. There's so many things that will improve our stress response or will add some extra stress, you know, will increase our cortisol levels, things like that. We have 2 lessons just looking at lifestyle. Then we look at time management, you know, how to set priorities in the things you do. Figure out, you know, what is the most important things, you know, to prioritize and, you know, get in a leaner schedule, something that is more manageable for you. And we have 2 lessons to look into emotional stress, you know, like Lucia was showing us today, you know, that our emotions are really something that is going to give you quite an, is going to determine in a big extent, you know, if you're going to be stressed or not. You know? How you act with it emotionally, how you're thinking about the situation. And I'm going to give you some tools here as well, you know, what you can do to control that, you know. And then what I found is perfectionism. 9 out of 10 people who are stressed out, you know, have really problems with perfectionism, you know. And I have, for this reason, I have included a special lecture just to see, you know, where's perfectionism coming from, and what can you do to control that as well? You know, what techniques can you use to get this under control, to think about this a different way about these events here. Setting healthy boundaries is an important thing as well, you know, and thinking about your purpose, everything else. You know, there's some tools here that can really be useful for you. So I will put the link in the chat for you, just a copy of that for you. So if you're interested, look at that and really think, you know, what is stress doing to you? What's the cost of all of that? You know, how is it impacting you? And think about it. How much different your life will be when you have stress under control.
You know, I love that you put together this great toolbox for people to take advantage of, Martin, because if you think about it, stress affects all areas of our life. And as we get the tools in our toolbox and have the time working with someone like Martin to give us accountability from week to week, to not only give us information, not just tools about how to deal with this, but actually we get to practice it. And as we practice it, we get to become better at, for example, thinking about our thinking. We start to recognize what is it that's driving the stress in my life, because it's different for different people. What stresses me may not stress you at all, and vice versa. But as you get more tools in your toolbox, then think about what that can do for you. It can decrease the health issues that you're dealing with. It can improve your relationships with other people. That means you can get along better at your job. If you're managing your stress better, you can get promotions more easily. There are all sorts of benefits that you can get as you improve your ability to use the tools in your toolbox. And I think that having a container like the one Martin's providing for you for 3 months, where you get to practice that and you get to say, hey, here's where I had a breakdown. Here's where I realized that I've been thinking incorrectly about things. And I get to develop and build new habits of dealing with these different areas of stress. It can really make a difference to my life. So I really appreciate the fact that you've gone to the work of putting that together in ways that can be such a big benefit and really put money back in our pockets as we manage stress better. So thank you for that, Martin.
You say about applying that things, you know, we have, every lesson will have some worksheets, you know, you can to think really, you know, how does it affect you? How can I work this practically in my life, you know? You have the direct feedback, you can have the questions in every lesson, every presentation we're going to have. And you have some private time with me as well, to really get a strategy that's going to work for you, how to apply it for you.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I'm
Yes,
not seeing any more questions. I don't know if anybody else wants to raise their hand if you're on camera or whatever, if you have any other questions or comments.
Any question? Yeah. What do you think about that?
If you don't have any questions or comments, yeah, tell me, what's your takeaway? What did you learn today that you think is going to help you as you go forward in dealing with stress? I don't know, I'm not sure I'm saying your name right, but Vikas, you have your hand up. I'd love to hear from you.
Yes, I have a question about the tools that Martin shared. So Martin, these are going to be live sessions or
yes,
recorded sessions?
There are 12 live sessions. We going to present the topic, and then you can also ask questions, live on the call.
Is it going to be on Zoom, Martin?
On Zoom.
Zoom, okay. That's great.
And
people can join everywhere.
How many minutes these sessions are? Each session?
It's about 1 hour, with the presentation and questions and feedback and discussing things. So it turns out about an hour.
Okay, and is the time already decided? Like what times of the day this would be, or?
Yes, we used to do it Sundays, and what I'm planning on is 1 p.m. Eastern time. That's far it's worked for everybody. If there's a problem with the time, we can discuss if it's possible to change, but that's what I'm planning on.
Got it. Okay.
1 p.m. That'd be like 1 o'clock on the East Coast, and it would be 10 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast, Pacific Standard. Are you going to be recording it in case people miss the session?
It's recording as well. So if you're missing a session, it's recorded as well. But if you're live, you can interact, you can ask questions, everything like that.
Right.
So,
definitely an advantage to be there live, but I think sometimes people like to know that they can still get the goods if they had to be gone 1 week or something.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Any other question for Lucia or what else?
Yeah, one more question about it also says one-on-one coaching. Are there a specific number of one-on-one coachings that are?
Yeah, it's about once a month.
Okay. And those coaching sessions are going to be with you or someone else?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. And Lucia, I really appreciate your time today. We surely learned a lot during this time.
Oh, good. Thank you so much, because I'm so glad to have you on the call, and just glad that you have been investing in yourself by taking the time to show up to Martin's presentations, his summit, and today's meeting, because I know that people that take the time to do this, to invest in themselves, they actually get a return on their investment, because as you learn and you start applying these things practically, it can be completely life-changing.
Yeah, there was a clap on the video, but I think you like the talk as well. Anybody wants to say a takeaway? What did you learn today? What was important for you?
Yeah, I'd love to know. What did you find helpful?
But it's shy today.
I know, right?
Because
Harry, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the important, like if I have to just take one thing out of this whole session, I think it would be how to try. Basically, I know it's easier said than done, but at least try to practice the replacing the SIB with SRC, SRB, basically.
Yes.
Kind of stress-inducing thought with a stress-reducing thought, right? A belief. I think that is something that kind of, if we can keep it at the top of our mind and kind of just having that conversation with ourselves whenever we feel stressful, I think that can change a lot of things. So that is one thing that I'll surely take away from this session.
Yeah, so many times we don't even think about all the self-talk going on in the head, you know, and how it's influencing us.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Surely that's something important to really analyze. And yes. All right. I think if there's no more comments, I want to thank you, Lucia, for being with us today. I think it
Oh,
was
you're
really
welcome. I was happy to be here. Nice seeing all of you here. I'm so glad that Zoom was invented so that we could meet each other from around the world all at the same time. It's a real privilege that we couldn't have done 15 years ago. So I'm just glad that all of you showed up today. Thank you.
Yes. All right. So thank you for being with us today. And if you want to look at the program, it's the link in the chat. And yes, we'll keep in touch.
All righty, sounds
Till
good.
next time.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Bye.
Good
Good
night.
night.